A country is known by the men and women it looks up to as great. If we take this standard of judging a country, we find that we're a little short. The great men are popular figures in music, in the movies, baseball players, football players. The saints don't even rate. And yet that's really what life's about. Everybody has his own odyssey and his search for truth. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own odyssey because I was seeking truth, excuse me, from a very young age. And I didn't know where to turn. One's natural thought would be God. But I found that the churches weren't giving me God, they were giving me politics. And I felt that there's just got to be some other answer than this sterile liturgy with nothing but belief in things that you don't know if anybody made it, because you can only sort of like they say that doctors bury their mistakes. Well, in this case, the people who died, do they go to heaven? Do they go to hell? Do they go nowhere? You don't know. They don't come back to say, yes, it's true, it works. And I felt that just to believe in something like this wasn't satisfying to me. So I tried to find truth in a number of different ways. But gradually it occurred to me that truth, it's too big a subject. Truth is cosmic. I'm just a little tiny ant. It doesn't mean much to me how big the universe is. It doesn't mean that much to me that there are something like 100 billion galaxies. And who's counting at that point? What does mean something to me is inspiration. If I can find something of what I want in life, what do I want? I want to find joy. I want to be inspired by what I do. And I tried to find this inspiration in different ways. First, I thought of becoming an astronomer. And it was exciting to me. Back in the 1930s, when I was thinking that way, I was about, 10, 11, 12. A teacher came to me and said that, this universe is much larger than we've thought. There are whole systems of stars, just like all the stars you see around us. That he didn't use the word galaxies, they hadn't come up on it yet. But he said there are these other systems of stars, maybe as many as 2 or 3. Wow, I was just overwhelmed. Just think of the level of knowledge that we've achieved in just a little over 100 years. It was a little over 100 years ago that they finally discovered that the sun wasn't the center of the whole everything. We knew by then that the earth wasn't, and that was quite a revelation in itself. It caused a great many bruised feelings. The church never forgave Galileo until 1970-something. 400 years to forgive him for being right. Well, okay, that's fine. This is understandable. But it wasn't what I wanted. It was so inspiring when I went out and looked at the stars, thought, where does it all come from? What does it all mean? And I thought of becoming an astronomer. And then I learned that to be an astronomer is probably the least inspiring aspect of astronomy, because they have to work so much with formulae and mathematical theories and so on, and they don't get a chance to enjoy it aesthetically as much as you might think. You'd think that their whole life was spent in front of a telescope just admiring those rings around Saturn. I had my own private theory that Saturn was where heaven is, because it had a halo. And well, I don't suppose that's true, but at any rate, I really was interested in becoming one in spite of the difficulties until when I was 13 and new in this country, I was making a telescope and grinding a lens, a 6-inch lens mirror, which would give me my telescope to enjoy all this stuff myself. And I was almost at the end when the thing fell from the table and cracked, and it was just heartbreaking. And I decided maybe I'm not dedicated enough, so I never got into that. But I thought some system, I even thought was communism a system. It was a well-packaged plan, and for a while it impressed me until I saw that it wasn't working that way. My friends in Romania, by that time I think, were being shipped off to Siberia and slaughtered. It just didn't seem like any system that could produce that hardness of heart could be what I was looking for. We aren't ants, each one of us is individual. But it's nice to think that way in the beginning because it's a sort of a system. And you like to think that there's some system at work here until you realize that there can't be a system. We cannot envision a world that is conveniently pat. It's too chaotic as far as our human brains are able to think. And always underneath my seeking was an aesthetic desire. And I thought of being an artist in some way, poet, writer. In fact, I determined to be a playwright. And musician, well, I worked hard at playing the piano hours a day, but these fingers were just not made for the piano. And so bit by bit, I tried to think of perfect systems. I tried to think of perfect societies. So many ideas I had. When I was 15, I thought what I wanted to do was start a community that would create this perfect environment. But I found that, well, in that case, what happened was that all my friends were enthusiastic until they discovered I was serious. And then they all scattered. But I still believed that there must be some hope for a better world, some promise in... I felt that if we have this desire, then there must be a way to fulfill it. And it seemed like the impossible dream. And yet when I thought further, I thought, what else have you given us? What has society given us? It's given ideals that are absolutely, they just don't make sense. Competition. Do you really think that competition is the way to win? That's what they'll tell you in any corporate situation. They'll tell people you have to beat the other fellow down. Leo de Rocher said, nice guys finish last. I grew up with this philosophy. You've all grown up with this philosophy. What does it produce? Does it give us anything that we want? It certainly does not. Because when you've ended the whole line and finally scrambled your way up to the top of this dung heap, all you've got is dry hearts, burned out minds, and unhappiness. And I began to think, no, truth can't be knowing how many stars there are in this galaxy, how many galaxies there are in space. What is the nature of the atom? That's not truth. It doesn't touch me. And so I began to think seriously about truth as inspiration. We need to revamp our values. And you know, it looks like an impossible task. But if you look back over history, you find that people have been moved, not by the great conquerors. Sure, they managed to butcher a few million people. Sure, they managed to force everybody to believe in this and do that. But after they died, everybody just heaved a sigh of relief and went on about being human again. The people who've changed the world have always been people with spiritual vision. Now, the trouble with spirituality is that it's been so tied up with the church, and you think that God has to be some sort of super pope. Well, that doesn't make sense. In fact, I remember going out. I was studying stagecraft in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was 21 years old at the time. I went out for this long walk because I thought all the plays that I saw, I didn't want to write things like that. People thought I'd be a successful playwright and so on. I thought, why? Why should I? First of all, I don't know what life's all about. Why should I dump or inundate the world with my ignorance? And secondly, where is inspiring drama? You read the dramas of this age, and you find so much pessimism and darkness, and it doesn't take any great talent to tell everybody that life is no damn good. But it isn't the truth. You know, it's like this. If you have a hose, and you are putting water through the hose, and you want to increase the pressure of that water, there are two ways of doing so, aren't there? One is to squeeze the tip of the hose. The other, of course, is to turn on the faucet. Well, the way that modern art and modern philosophy and modern thinking goes is squeeze the tip of the hose. What do I mean by that? Tight feelings, anger, frustration, and people think they're being real. Man, if I can get really angry. I was in a supermarket behind somebody, and my cart touched him, bumped him very slightly. It certainly didn't bother him, but it shouldn't have bothered him. He said, some angry remark, and I retorted sort of lightheartedly. I figured it wouldn't matter. After all, he hadn't been hurt. I just didn't see him. And so I said, well, I see you're serious. Well, really, I'm awfully sorry. I didn't want to damage you. I'm mad as hell. Well, somehow people get the idea that by being angry and being violent and having narrow emotions and a feeling of vengeance and wanting to hurt people and so on, that they're being real. And I just could never buy that argument. In fact, I find that people are a lot more real when they don't think in terms of getting theirs. In other words, this society tells us to do the very things that are going to cause misery, not only to them, to the world. The world is sort of drowning in this violence that just keeps growing and growing. Look at Palestine and Israel. Well, they each have an absolutely marvelous solution to the whole problem. If you hit me, I'll hit you twice. And then I think, oh, I showed them, haven't I? Well, of course, they turn around, take a deep breath, and come and hit you 4 times. And so you keep building up this, what's it going to do in the end? I don't see any solution the way they're going, except a big explosion. I think we're coming to that. I think that's what's going to change the world, if nothing else. But it's not necessary. People are automatically, they want kindness, they want, but I don't know if they automatically do. They should. Deep down inside they do. But honestly, I think that if many a person died and found himself in heaven, he'd be absolutely miserable. No one to fight with, no one to argue. People seem to want their violence and their misery and their so on, but it doesn't work. That's the bottom line. I say that if people are wanting to express their anger, it's because they think they'll get something good out of it. They'll beat the other fellow down and get ahead. You don't get ahead of anything. Where's there to get ahead of? It's sort of like being on the freeway. You see a bunch of cars in front of you and you want to pass them to get ahead. And finally you do. There's a whole bunch of cars further ahead. And you're the last one there. And it goes on. Life is an unceasing freeway. What we need is to understand that it isn't in the future that you're going to find happiness. It isn't in the distance that you're going to find it. I used to have this idea. I remember when I was 19, I went to Mexico thinking, oh, I've had it with this culture. They're so materialistic. They think that the only thing they want is a nice big suburban home and bank account and everything. I thought, let me go to where people are more simple. And so I went to Mexico. And I spent the summer there. Well, it was an eye-opener. There were two things wrong with it. First of all, those people weren't simple, genuine folks. They're just human beings like you and me, and with the same problems. But the worst of it was, I felt I was no different. I was the same old jerk in Mexico as in Philadelphia. And so I realized that the answer has to be in me. I'd done a lot of reading of Emerson and Thoreau, and I remembered Emerson's saying that travel is a fool's paradise. Well, I'd done it all my life. I crossed the Atlantic the first time when I was 6 months old, and I think I've never stopped since. So I at least can agree with him. The thing that makes it different for me now is that I know it's not paradise. I have to travel because I have to help people. I have to do what I have to do. But on the other hand, the solution is always where you are. I remember I came back, I was going to Brown University, and The Razor's Edge, I think it was that one, had just come out. Yeah, that was the one. And there was a girl at the table in the coffee shop that we were at saying, "Oh, I'd just love to go to India and get lost." I said, "Whom would you lose?" You wouldn't lose the only person you're trying to get away from. That's an irony. If we can't escape ourselves, and we can't, some people try to do it through drugs or drinking, they can never escape themselves. You're stuck with you. So why not make the best of it? And instead, people seem to be bent on making the worst of it. They think the more I come up with real attitudes like anger and fury and violence, they think they're going to find happiness. No. There's only one group of people, and it's very interesting if you study it. Look, let's just be scientific for a moment. Let's look at human beings as living in a great laboratory. And in this laboratory, you see how people live and what it does for them. And you will see that in every walk, musicians, writers, doctors, politicians, housewives, teachers, what is it? It doesn't matter. Nowhere do you find unanimity of people saying, yes, this is what should be done by me, by everybody. Usually people who are successful would just assume nobody else could be successful, so they can sort of be at the top of that particular pile. But the truth is that one group is an exception to this rule. All those who have sought God seriously, not by going to church on Sunday, not by believing. I mean, you can believe all sorts of things. That doesn't make it true. They believed the world was flat, and it was proved not to be flat. Your beliefs don't matter at all. And God certainly, when they say, praise the Lord, my guru, Yogananda, said that he used to get the image of a God as a rich, pampered lady who wanted flattery. He doesn't care whether you believe or not. You care because understanding the right things, having the right expectations, at least helps to put you in a good direction. But you've got to prove it by your own experience. And in this experience, you see that those who have deeply meditated, not with the thought of just sort of saying, yeah, I believe, but saying, I have to know, and have sought to know God. All of those who have succeeded and are accepted by others as having succeeded, you don't find a single exception. Every one of them, and look through the chronicles, the history of all religions, all countries, every age, you'll find that those people are shining lights. Those people have what everybody wants. Those people have peace of mind, they have joy, they have serenity, and never do you find anybody, I mean, you know, the suicide rate among millionaires is higher than that among beggars. I don't know exactly if this statistic is right, but I've read it, and I believe it because I've mixed with both. I remember in Bucharest, we were going to a skating rink, and there were little gypsy children coming up and Nu am mâncat pentru 3 zile, I haven't eaten for 3 days, you know. So we figured, well, we'll give them something. We went into the skating rink and skated for an hour. Then we came out and we saw these children laughing and playing and dancing in the street. As soon as they saw us, nu am mâncat pentru... Actually, there's not the gray misery among those people that you might think, but the saints, not one of them has ever said, oh, what a scam. Many people criticize God, quite understandably, saying, why would he allow suffering? They don't take into account the possibility that if you do something wrong, you're bound to go against some kind of law. If you put your hand on a hot stove, it's going to hurt. If you persist in putting your hand on a hot stove, it'll hurt very much. But God didn't want you to be hurt. The stove didn't want you to be hurt. You went against the way your body is made. We need to learn the laws of life. We know, without actually putting it to the test, that if we tried to live on a diet of nails, we probably wouldn't outlast the week. We know there are right ways of living, right ways of acting. There are also right ways of thinking, and this people aren't so aware of. One of the things in Ananda community, which I founded, I couldn't hear the introduction, so I don't know what he said, but I'm assuming he said something like that. That we have a great laboratory, hundreds of people living in these different communities, Nevada City, Sacramento, Mountain View in Palo Alto, Portland, Seattle, Assisi, where I live now in Italy. We're starting something on the East Coast. And the wonderful thing about this human laboratory is we don't tell people how they have to live. We don't tell people they've got to do this. We offer them a model that we say works, and we say, try it. Well, in any community, and especially when there isn't any appeal in hypocrisy that says, well, this is the in attitude, and so I'm going to have it. No, but they're told that by sharing with others, you'll be happy. By taking from others, you'll be unhappy. And a few very basic principles that all religions and all great saints have taught. And we see, because not everybody's able to live up to the same level, we see it infallibly in 35 years of this experiment, if you want to call it that. We have seen that in every case, those who think of sharing with others, those who think of helping others, those who think of living for a higher truth and not just for I, me, and mine, they're always happy. And those who think first me are never happy. It's a very important principle to understand because it works. Somebody said to me a few years ago, he said, you have so many you have wonderful people here. I said, if you were to see one or two people and see that they're serene and happy in themselves and so on, you'd say, well, those are wonderful people. But when you see so many people like that, you have to say it's not they, it's what they're doing. The truth that we're looking for is not something tangible that you can tack on a door like Martin Luther with his declaration against Rome. It's something that comes in, as Jesus Christ put it, he comes like a thief in the night. Well, the thief in the night is not going to come and ring the front doorbell. He's going to sneak in through a cellar window. You'll find entry where he's not expected. And that's how God comes. That you don't find him suddenly in a great blaze of light, but you find that when you live in the right way, somehow from who knows where, but you're starting to feel different. You don't have to say, give me inspiration. You feel it coming, and you feel the inspiration rising from within you. Well, this is what religions and what masters of the great religions have all not only taught, but manifested. This idea, by the way, I've turned around here and looked at this. These are two recent books that I've written. One is Hope for a Better World, the cooperative community solution. The other is the promise of immortality. And in the promise of immortality, which is the subject of tonight's lecture, I do what Yogananda did. I take two major scriptures with the assumption that all of them are trying to teach the same truth, do teach the same truth, not always with the same level of inspiration, but in one way or another, they're talking from the same level. The Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. These are great scriptures. The Bible is a little harder to understand. I tried getting into it when I started realizing that I wanted God, and realizing that wanting God means putting myself in tune with His consciousness, trying to draw more on whatever He is. But when I thought of truth, I thought, well, He's not, I don't want Him to fill me with new formulae. I want Him to fill me with inspiration. I want Him to fill me with love, fill me with joy. That's what truth is. What is the use of anything else? What's the use of a knowledge of a menu in a restaurant if you can't afford to pay for a meal? Have that knowledge of love and you've got your meal. That's what it's really about. And so, in these great scriptures, you find that they don't say only believe. My hardship with the Bible in the beginning was that I began at the beginning. That was a mistake. First of all, well, Adam and Eve, maybe, okay, but serpent talking? Some minister said to Yogananda, well, in those days, serpents could talk. There's a lot of ignorance in religion, too. Yogananda said, I bow to the colossal temple of ignorance that I behold before me. But in this realization, I saw that they did teach a basic thing. What did Jesus say? He said, the first commandment is to love God with body, mind, strength, soul, everything. If you're going to love in that way, it's very different from patting him on the head on Sunday morning and say, I still believe in you. It means you know that there's no other solution. And so when there's that yearning, if you read the lives of saints, they're no different from you. People tend to think, oh, these saints were special human beings. You read an inspiring life like the life of St. Francis of Assisi. Wonderful life. But don't, for God's sake, put it in a museum. He lived the way he did to show us how we can live too. Now that doesn't mean that you've got to get on a highway and walk with all these cars passing you and refuse to use a car in this day and age. Die of asphyxiation from all that carbon monoxide. It doesn't mean that. It means in whatever circumstance, he came that way for a particular purpose. But God has expressed himself through so many people and in so many different ways, and always it comes back to a central truth. You, in your relation to the infinite. Now there's an interesting point that I brought out in my book, Hope for a Better World. It was for Copernicus who first realized that the earth is not the center of the whole system, that the earth goes around the sun. That was as far as people could take it until the late 19th century. But even that was earth-shattering to people who thought that we were the center of it all, the whole explanation for the universe, for God's having brought us into existence, all depended on not just geocentricity, but homocentricity, you might say, centered in man. And suddenly, people began to discover, and this was a shaking experience to them, that we're very small, that the world itself isn't that big. I don't know how they didn't see it before. Any mariner, and there were thousands and thousands of them. Well, I've been on a ship quite a few times because we used to go from Romania to America every few years when my dad got a vacation. All you have to do is look at a ship coming from the distance. It doesn't start as a little dot, gradually getting bigger and bigger. No. You see suddenly appearing up from the horizon a mast, the hull. Then finally you see the whole ship. But you can see from that simple thing, it should have been obvious that the earth is round, but somehow people weren't thinking. That's been the trouble with mankind. They don't think. They don't get the right premises. And I've read, and this is what caused me to write that book, all the great thinkers that have molded our thinking in the West, they were technicians, materialists, fiercely competitive. All their thinking, to me, I thought, well, they're crazy. These aren't the right questions to ask. An example was Adam Smith, who wrote the Wealth of Nations. And he said, perfectly right too, that a person who opens a bakery, he doesn't bake bread to make you happy. He bakes bread to sell it to you so that he will be happy, so that he has an income, so that he can support his family and so on. Well, this is obvious enough. People were outraged. They thought this was against Christian morality. Well, for God's sake, why? Of course people are going to have to think for themselves. But I said he hasn't taken that thought far enough. He only took it to one level. He said this baker is only thinking not of making other people happy, but making himself happy through them, which in itself is egotistical, but let's face it, that is what man is like. Far better to face realities. But I said, let's now ask another question. Supposing in the same town, there happen to be two bakers. We'll call the first one William Baker. And William Baker is only thinking in terms of what he can get from his customers. But there's another baker in town whom I called Joe Crumpet. And Joe Crumpet understood, just as William did, that you have to provide for yourself, you have to make a living, you expect your customers to pay you, you're not going to give the bread free. But Joe Crumpet has this difference, that when he meets a customer, he's glad to see him. Asks about his wife, asks about his children, asks him if what he's doing is what they'd like or would they like him to do something else, includes them in his circle of friendship. Now you ask yourself the simple question, which baker would you go to? I think it's self-evident, unless you happen to be a relative of William Baker, you're going to go to Joe Crumpet. And so what we see is that there are two kinds of egocentricity. One is absorbing, clutching, grabbing for oneself. The other is expansive, that shares its happiness, that tries to find its happiness through sharing also with producing also happiness in others. And so we see that, granted that ego is a beginning, it still has to be understood whether it's expansive or contractive. Always when people suffer, it's because there's some contraction. Always when they're happy, they expand their consciousness. Now, this brings us to another fact. What looked like the demotion of the human race to a third-rate power, you might say, except, what would you call it instead, a 200 billionth power? Nothing. You suddenly realize that, wait a minute, we've just got our values wrong. You can't ever understand anything except from one point. Scientists today say that the atom is the key to the universe. The atom is the key to all understanding. We are little atoms. Our little ego, it's not even this body. The ego is a little center of consciousness in your brain looking out at these things, but you feel you're hurt in the hand, it's really in the brain that is taking place. Your sense of self is not in the whole body. It's a very small point, but it's only from this point that you can understand anything. You have to know, and that's why the scriptures have all said, and the Greeks who weren't writing scripture said, gnothis auton, know thyself. If you can know yourself to your deepest depths, you automatically understand other people. You'll find that people of great vision are not people who sit there trying to analyze people as if they were under a microscope. They're people who empathize, people who have love for others, and through that love and that empathy, they can relate to it and understand. You know, my teacher, my guru, to give you an example of this, I talked to a lady in Mexico, and I happened to speak Spanish, so we were talking, but she said, you know, I don't know a word of English. And Yogananda didn't know a word of Spanish. And I had an interview with him, and I don't know how it happened, but we understood each other perfectly. Well, this kind of ability to be so in tune, whether he spoke English, whether somehow she could understand him at that moment, there's a level of understanding that transcends what our age has told us is the only way to understand, which is just logic. Logic is such a clumsy thing. It's intuition that gives you real understanding. No musician, for example, or no composer has ever written a piece of music thinking, well, now let's see, logically, this should be the next note, and then after that, well, this was here and this was here, perhaps in between, getting some sort of mathematical formula. People who write from mental inspiration never write decent music. People who feel it don't even know why they feel it. But there is this faculty in human nature that brings insight, brings inspiration. When you sang me that song this morning, this afternoon, it was a marvelous thing to see, a perfect blend between melody and noble sentiment. This doesn't come by logic, but when you get in tune with that flow, it happens. Well, this is what we want in life. We want to be able to feel, and people will say, yeah, but nice guys finish last. Well, I don't know about all that stuff. All I know is that it doesn't work. You can sweat your heart out, getting to the top of it all, getting it all together, die of cancer. There's no answer that way, but these saints, whom worldly people sort of scoff at as being unrealistic, and oh yeah, well, he's a wonderful fellow, but there's always that but in their minds. But if you look at their lives, you see that they were fantastic successes in everything they did. And if they didn't make $1 million, who knows? Maybe they didn't want $1 million. Why do people keep placing false standards on success? Success is not money. This is another thing I mentioned in my chapter on Adam Smith. Success isn't how much money you've got. Success is having what you want. And if you don't want anything, then you're successful. I went to Mexico years ago, came back from Mexico after 2 weeks, and the customs officer laughed. She said, I can't believe it, 17 cents? That's all I declared. I said, oh, I didn't see anything I wanted. Well, that really is wealth. When you have what you want, you don't need more than that. But what is the morality of today? Well, we've got to keep the economy going, and that means we have to keep wanting to buy, and everybody has to keep running faster and faster and faster. Well, you know, you do that running downhill, pretty soon your legs won't keep up with you. You'll come a cropper. And if you look at people in these different walks of life, and it unfortunately takes a long time to prove your point, but they do prove it for you. Look at them. Those people are always looking for that carrot at the end of the stick. They keep going toward it, but they can't reach it because the stick's tied to their own head. And meanwhile, what are they doing? Pulling a load of worries behind them. Happiness comes when you can find that you have it already. It isn't only that we need to do things in order to find inspiration. We need simply to be inspired doing them. And then suddenly, and it's so simple, and this is the point I want to emphasize, these changes have taken place. It's not new. They can take place now. And all influences tell you the opposite. They'll tell you, you have to get rich, you have to do this, you have to do that in order to make it. And so you work yourself to the death. And what have you got at the end? A few dollars maybe to leave to your heirs who had the sense not to walk in your footsteps. What we're really looking for is inspiration. And if that's the case, why not simply be inspired now? You can be just as happy owning nothing. I remember there was a time I went to Arizona and I didn't have any money. I had very little. I was living on $10 a month. And I was wonderfully happy. It was a great challenge. I had to find where the best bargains were for food. I learned how to, milk isn't all that good if it's powdered, but I learned how to retrain my palate and say, yeah, I like it. I realized that bread costs quite a bit, and if you don't eat it fairly soon, it molds. But chapatis or what do they call them? In Spanish? Tortilla. They just make them one at a time, no leavening. Just buy the flour and the rest is simple. You don't have to have a big dessert, enough to have 1 teaspoon of a dessert and keep that same dessert for a whole week. Saves a lot of money. I did lose weight, but it was... You can be happy with so little is the point I want to make. And I have traveled all my life, as I said. The happiest people I've seen were never people who were wealthy unless they had found their real wealth inside. They were people who were simple and just understood that their real wealth is their state of consciousness. This is the message that the religions have brought. It's a crying shame that the followers of these different religions are so sectarian. Because the important thing, honestly, if a Muslim loves God and a Christian doesn't love God, is Jesus Christ going to be more pleased with the Christian because he signed on the dotted line? Or more pleased with the Muslim because he loves the only thing Jesus loved? What you believe is trivial. And the promise of immortality that have come through the great scriptures has always been that if you live in this way, you can find a state that is not in the future. People in Christianity and in most religions think that heaven is in the future. Heaven has to be right now. If you can live in such a way that you're in heaven now, you don't have to worry about where you'll go afterwards. This is the only truth you know. We must understand that the purpose of religion is to seek God. Not God as some vague thing. Ultimately, it comes down to getting to know yourself. Who are you really? Well, I'm me. Well, who's me? Joe Crumpet? No. Joe Crumpet didn't have a name before he was named as a baby. But you look in baby's eyes and you see there's something there that isn't created. It's been around a long time. Like one time Yogananda picked up a baby somebody gave him to bless. He said, yeah, I nearly dropped it because I saw in the eyes of that little baby a murderer. We're fortunately not given the memory of other lives in order that we can start again and have a new try at being good. But ultimately, we've been around a long time. You can't think in terms of immortality the way we think. We think that to be immortal is, 1,000 years. 1,000 years? How long has the universe been around? How long has God been around? No time at all. The odd thing about trying to define God's infinity and God's eternity is this, that he's both large and infinitesimal, infinite and infinitesimal. And he's neither large nor small. That's where our problem comes in. How can you define something that's so totally beyond logic? But it's the same thing with time. He's not as if he was a long time. All you have to do is learn to live right now. That is the promise of immortality, when you can have that consciousness right now. When you're not thinking, oh God, 5 minutes, she's late. You've been around billions of years and you're worried about 5 minutes? But we always think in time, because this is the delusion of our lives, with a little body and a little human experience. The truth of it is you've been around a long time. You're as old as God, quite literally. Think of it this way. What could God have made you out of except His own consciousness? He had to dream us into existence. He couldn't go out and shop in a hardware store to get whatever it is that produced us. He dreamed us into being. This is physicists are starting to talk like this, but they're not the cutting edge. The great yogis are the cutting edge of these things. And they discover that the way to find it is to have it right now. We need to change our ideals. It's so easy. When you think that I've been around so long. Now, okay, what is the universe made of? It's duality. That one consciousness could only produce the universe by creating an appearance of two. One consciousness moving left and right, producing a vibration. The whole universe, science says it too, the whole universe is vibratory. Everything is in a state of vibration. This means that if we can learn to get away from that thought that I must push the pendulum this direction to get away from that direction, because in this direction comes happiness and in that direction comes pain, and so they keep pushing toward greater and greater success, more money, more fame, more everything. They don't understand that the nature of a pendulum, which is a good explanation for duality, is that pendulum will have to swing in the opposite direction. It's the way of this world, that for every plus there's a minus, for every light there's darkness, for male there's female, for happiness there's pain. Everything in this world is dual. You won't find more happiness by pushing further in the direction of outward happiness. It doesn't come that way. It will come when you can get that central point and be completely in yourself. Now here's an irony. For incarnations, people look, sweat, struggle to find that plus, never stopping to realize that every plus is going to have to be, by the law of things, cancelled out by a minus. And is it not ironic to think that all these lives you work for literally nothing? It's a fact. You can never get what you want in this world because it just isn't there to be given to you. Every time you achieve success, you know things are going to go wrong someday. They have to. You never see people going. I went to the Joffrey Ballet in New York. It was a very disquieting experience. The choreographer had come up with this theory that creativity means always evolving out of something. So the movements were all in a linear direction. It was very unsatisfying to me, and I'm sure to everybody, in a sense that most people wouldn't have thought it through. But for every time you go this way, you need to go that way. That's why dance is always like this. That's an artistic perfection. They were going against that. You know, the definition of originality, most people think of it as something nobody's ever done before. Well, what's the point? Originality means acting from your own point of origin. If you can act from what you really feel, then it doesn't have to be any great thing. It can be just mending shoes. There's stories of saints who did nothing more exalted than that. But when they felt the joy of God, people loved going to them. Maybe they didn't know why they enjoyed going to them, but they felt better in their company. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody could understand that instead of doing, we have to be. We have to become that which we hope to accomplish. And the accomplishment is just an echo. It doesn't mean anything. When people tell me, oh, I've done good things this way and that way, I think, what does it matter? If it has helped me to become more complete in myself and to find God's inspiration, I'm grateful. But apart from that, I don't think of any of it as having any meaning, except if it helps others to have a sense of meaning too, but nothing more than that. If we want to change the world, we won't do it with a new political system. We won't do it by suddenly writing a peace treaty that everybody agrees to. You know how long peace treaties are useful for? About as long as it takes the politicians to reach their exits. They leave the room and already they're starting to think, now how can I get mine? Peace won't come that way, but peace can come when you are peaceful. Don't go to peace marches and imagine that by shouting and angry sloganeering and everything, that you're going to persuade everybody to be peaceful. But you know, if you have peace, people feel it. And when they feel it, they don't need to be convinced. So what is going to change the world? It's like, and this is another point I bring out in that book, Hope for a Better World. Life as opposed to human artifice. The human artist always has to work from outside in. He does a sculpture. Pygmalion did a beautiful woman, sculpture of a beautiful woman, fell in love with it and prayed to Aphrodite, who blessed him that the statue would come to life. Well, we don't hear much about what happened after that. I think it's better just let it alone. But in truth, even to bring that stone statue to life required a divine blessing. God and life both work from the center out. It's like the rings of a tree trunk. You see, every year the tree has grown, but it's always from that little center. We can grow not by becoming emperors, owning great kingdoms. We don't grow that way. And when we die, it all falls apart. There's no gain that way. What we've got to do is rethink our priorities. Somebody wrote me a letter the other day saying, you just aren't in step with the times. Well, no, I know I'm not. But she was saying in this letter, it's a hopeless task. There, I think she's wrong. Yes, we can change the world. All we have to do is change ourselves, really. It doesn't matter what other people do. You don't have to worry about what are you doing for the starving whoever's. Be a better person. That is the only sermon we can ever speak to others from our own experience when we find inner joy, when we find inner love. And when we look on people with that, it's like a contagion, but of a good thing, not a disease. A contagion of inspiration that people see this and think, oh yeah, that works. I like it. People can be changed when they see something that works and that works in a good way. There have been so many negative influences in our lives. I was raised on them. I'm sure most of you were raised on them. I went to the university. The one thing that I had was I just would not buy it. It didn't make sense to me. I felt this inspiration in my heart. And I said, there's got to be that in store for all of us if we were just looking the right way. And I realized the more I look inside myself, the more it will change me. I remember, well, my dad was already in Egypt. He worked for Exxon now, as an oil geologist. And they sent him to Egypt to discover oil. And my mother was to join him. And I left her on the ship, put her on the ship, and she left. And I was suddenly alone and could do what I wanted. Well, that was Divine Mother's opportunity. That was the very day I discovered Autobiography of a Yogi. And when I read that book, I was absolutely convinced. I had never read about these things. Mind you, it's a pretty challenging book. On page 8, this great master, Lahiri Mahasaya, is materializing in a wheat field. It was very far from anything I knew. But I felt there was such I just had to put those things on a shelf because I felt here, for the first time in my life, I've met somebody through the pages of a book that he's got what I want. And I took the next bus non-stop from New York to Los Angeles, and I met him. The first words I said, I never expected to use such words to anybody. I was very independent in my thinking. But when I met him, I said, I want to be your disciple. I've never changed that thought in 54 years practically. Because I knew that there was something real here. Everything else was not giving anything to anybody. But what he had, he radiated wherever he went. He could be talking about a ditch that needed to be dug the next day. And I would be sitting in his presence and just feel so joy coming over me. Or he could give me a glance. I was very nearsighted until I had this laser surgery on my eyes. Now I can see every one of you. And I didn't have my glasses on, but somehow from across the room, not because, in other words, of any sweet expression or anything like that, but so much love flowed from him that I just was weeping. These things are what everybody wants. And they always think, yeah, but first I got to get a bit of salary. First I have to build that house. First I have to do this. First I have to do that. Before they know it, the undertaking is doing his thing. We need to understand this lesson now. I don't mean tomorrow, now. I'd like to persuade you to realize that the promise of immortality is not the promise of what will happen after death. Sure, something will happen and it's bound to be good, but only if you carry good baggage. Not if your heart is loaded down with envy and hatred and jealousy. But if you go blessing everything, blessing the world, because you feel nothing but blessing in yourself, then surely it will be a good future. But the point is, feel it now. Don't expect the future to give it to you. The immortality that you're looking for is right here and right now. It will never exist anywhere else. And if you can really understand this you will understand the whole universe. This may seem fanciful, but it's really not such a big thing. The same atom structure is everywhere. The same ego is everywhere. When I see movies or read books about aliens coming here, at first the thought was, because I was always interested in starting communities, that maybe one culture would be discovered where there was ideal happiness, perfection, and so on. Gradually I became disillusioned. I remember, indeed, one time down in Carmel. On the road to Carmel, I picked up an old man who was standing there, middle-aged man. I could say old then, now I can't. With a suitcase by his side, and I thought, well, let me help him out. So I picked him up, and he gave me this story. And so I thought, well, I'd like to help this guy if he can. I had $50, so I gave him $25. And I took him to the home of some friends of mine who lived in Hollister. And we gave him lunch and so on. And he said, well, I'll be sure you get this money back. I don't want you to lose faith in human nature. And I said, listen, if I'd had faith in human nature, I'd have lost it a long time ago. I said, it's not your nature I trust. It's God. He'll take care of me. And it was so. He didn't pay me back. It didn't matter. God gave me 1,000,000-fold. These principles work. There's a reality to them. And I've proved it so many times in my life. One time, many years ago, it was in 1972, I felt that God, I always think of God as my Divine Mother. And I felt that my Divine Mother wanted me to go to India. And I had a little money that I'd gained from classes, and it was just enough to get me there and back. Well, anyway, 2 weeks before my scheduled departure, I drove down to San Francisco, and all of a sudden, something happened in the car, and I had to pull into a repair shop, and they pretty well convinced me I needed another car. Well, it was either India or another car, and I just didn't know what to do. I thought, well, the problem with going to India is I have to come back. And if I don't have a car, I live way up there in the mountains. So I was talking with friends of mine around the table in a restaurant, thinking, what should we do? And finally I said, look, I don't feel guidance, but my common sense tells me that I need a car. Doesn't have to be a new car, but a car. And so I said, Divine Mother, mind you, you can talk like this to God. He doesn't take offense. I said, Divine Mother, if you still really want me to go, you're going to have to reimburse me. And so I put down, the car cost, a good used car, at that time was $1,200. And I paid him this, which meant I didn't have the money to go to India. Well, this was Friday evening. Monday morning, the next Monday morning, I got a letter from somebody I didn't know. He said that I've just been, what do they call it when you're let out of the army?
Discharged.
Discharged, that's the word, thank you. I'm still learning English. And I have this money, and I just felt the guidance to send it to you and tell you, please use it any way Divine Mother wants you to. Now, how many people think of God as Divine Mother in this country? How many people thinking of God as Divine Mother would assume I thought of God that way? You know, the likelihood is small. He didn't know me, I didn't know him. But he sent me a check made out to me personally, not to Ananda, for $1,000. So that got me to India and back. But you'd say that was a miracle. I've seen so many. God takes care of you. All you have to do, look, we're in a culture that stresses in experimentation, doesn't it? Why not try this simple experiment? Say, okay, God, for 1 year, or 1 month, or I'll bargain with you a week. I'll live just for you, and you have to do your part of the bargain. And I know that I am safe in your hands, whatever you do. Mind you, he sometimes gives you serious tests. It isn't that you don't get tested, but you find at the end of every test, usually, and I think he has a perverted sense of humor, usually the tests he gives you are such that you think, oh, anything but that. But if you go through it with faith, you'll find at the end of that particular little road, it was the only one that would bring you what you were looking for. And every other, even though it seemed that this was the way that promised and that promised nothing, those would all have failed. This one was the only one that would work. These are realities. And I'm not saying believe it. I'm saying test it. But you will see that the more you can clear your heart of personal desire, not think I want this and I want that and I like this and I like that, but just say, my life is yours, God. You'll be amazed at how your whole life can change, even in a moment. These are simple truths. They're too simple. Man is complex. Man likes complexity. Man likes to think, yeah, but how? But what? If you can shelve that thinking for a little while, you'll start to be amazed at the things that happen. I look back at all these things, and I just, it amazes me. Well, there's so many stories I could tell. I'm not here to tell you stories, but I am here to say that the promise of immortality has been given from the beginning of time, given by people, the only people in the world who really show that they have any right to say it, because they've found something and the others are only talking of what they hope to find someday. Like a couple of teenage girls got onto the bus in San Francisco one time many years ago, and they were beautiful and radiant and laughing, and you could see, I could sense that I could sense that all the other passengers were sort of looking at them with envy. Oh, to have youth, energy, happiness, beauty. I looked and I thought, I wonder what you'll be like in 10 years. You know, people don't stay the same, and they don't. That bloom of beauty. There was a beautiful rose in the Palo Alto community, wonderful pink. And I'd enjoy looking at it every day this week as I passed it. Every day. This is life. But it doesn't matter. If you can find your joy inside, whether you're young, whether you're old, doesn't make any difference at all. Yes, I can't run the 100-yard dash at my age. Who cares? I've done it. When I had my hip operated on the first hip, they've done others. I only have 2 hips, but they did 3 operations. And the doctor said, now what would you like to do? And I said, ski. He said, oh, I was afraid you'd say that. When I got the second one, I said, well, now my motto is hip, hip, hooray. But why let your state of mind be affected by the state of your body, your bank account, your popularity, your success, what other people think of you? How much of success is defined in terms of other people's envy? I want to have this so other people will look up to me. Isn't that envy? How can you be happy glorying in other people's unhappiness? Because if they envy you, then they're to that extent unhappy. Values are all wrong. All you need to do is change your values, and you'll find that it's so simple. Life is not complex. You just have to get away from that definition of it as complex. Get back to who you are. You are the center of the universe. You are the center of everything, circumference, center everywhere, circumference nowhere. When you have your consciousness centered in yourself, you suddenly can understand. If you look at the great works of art, music, literature, everything, what makes them great is not that those men were brilliant enough to be able to analyze people to specks of dust. They had the empathy to be at their center and through that feel the center of other people. And it's through that empathy that they are able to understand those people. I remember, I can't give you the exact example, but a wonderful Italian novel, I Promessi Sposi, you probably know of it. And a charming passage there was just a little human touch, which no author could have had if he hadn't felt himself in tune with the people there. I wrote a play not very long ago, we put it on at Ananda, called The Peace Treaty. And in this peace treaty, as usually is the case with drama, there had to be villains. Master said there have to be villains in life. They help you to love the hero. Necessary. But when I was writing those villainous parts, I had great fun. It's fascinating to see the depths of delusion the human mind can get into. They justified their actions and their villainy in ways that if you just followed their line of thinking, you'd be stuck, you'd be hooked by it. There was no answer to it, logically, but the play came up with a completely different answer that did work. Well, this is what life is about. Don't think you'll ever get it together just by reason and studying and being profound intellectually. Be a simple child. This is what Master used to tell me, because I was too intellectual. And I was proud of my intellect, but I didn't like being proud. I didn't like the dry feeling in my heart. And so when he told me to work on developing devotion, I worked on it, thank God. I remember one time that we were out at 29 Palms, and he had somebody turn out the lights, and then I heard a little sort of crinkling paper bag, and then suddenly, bzz, 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 these little sparks flying out from a toy gun that you had to have the lights out to see. And he turned the lights on again, and he looked at me. He said, how'd you like that? And well, I had all of I assumed that when he spoke it would be like Thoreau's essays. That it would be very profound, which it was, but in a very different way from what I thought. And I had this thought of the wise sage who wouldn't have much of a sense of humor. Listen, he could lay you out in the aisles laughing. But when he asked me, how do you like that? I said, it's fine, sir. I had to rethink my whole priorities here. Then he took out another little gun and shot it, and a thing came up and then a parachute fell to earth. I think he did it for me, to help me to see that you don't have to be solemn and grave. Look at most professors, they're just dried up husks. The real sages of this world are not philosophers, they're sages. A philosopher is somebody who loves wisdom. These people are wise. And a part of wisdom is simplicity. Just being able to enjoy, like that man he was a hermit who came to the temple where the great sage Ramakrishna lived. And his way of praying was to come out in the morning and look at the waves splashing in the river Ganges and look at the sun rising, and he'd say, "Oh, well done, God, well done." Well, that's the kind of attitude that you get when you have this. You enjoy everything. When people say, "Oh, I like this because Master liked it," what didn't he like? He saw something to give him joy everywhere. And suffering in other people, of course, didn't give him joy. But what he felt the joy in was trying to share with others the joy that he felt. And he did it so effectively that complete strangers have told me, when I first saw him, he was just sitting in a restaurant, and I thought, I've never seen anybody so spiritual. How could they know? Well, basically, it's simply this, that he had what they wanted. God has what you want. What do you want? You want to escape unhappiness and pain? Oops. You want to escape unhappiness and pain, avoid it, and to find happiness. But as long as you think happiness is getting this, and avoiding pain is avoiding that, you're going to be on this constant swing of the pendulum. But if you understand that, well, wait a minute, why wait for all that? I'm happy. When you can have that happiness inside, then you've got the problem of life itself solved. And you don't have to ask God. Master said the reason God won't reveal himself to people is that he knows all they want to do is argue with him. But when you understand, you understand. And you can see everything through the eyes of bliss. And you can see people, I don't put myself on that level at all, but certainly a few of his teachings have managed to rub off. And I was in Paris years ago, and it happened to be my birthday, and I wanted to go to a concert in a church, and I arrived there, and they were turning people away. They said, "I'm sorry, we're completely full." Well, I thought, gosh, it's my birthday. So I said, "Mais c'est mon anniversaire." And he said, "Oh, in that case, come in." So he found a seat for me, but the audience was completely filled, the auditorium. So he put me behind the altar with a few stragglers. And that way I was facing the auditorium. Well, the music was so joyful. And I guess I must have shown this joy, because later an old woman came to me on the metro, their subway, you know. And she said, "Don't you remember me?" And I said, "Well, no." She said, "Well, I was in the audience." And I said, "Well, 700 people. But she felt such a connection with the joy that she felt it was herself. And she sat down and started telling me her troubles, that her daughter wasn't being a good daughter, and these things that you don't share with people. But she felt that. People will think that you're their best friend if you are, first of all, their friend. The whole secret of these things is to be what you want others to be. Treat them the way you'd like them to treat you. And don't think of it as a matter of treating, but of emanating. Be childlike, be loving, be forgiving. As somebody said to Master who had scolded him once, "But you will forgive me, won't you?" Master was sort of taken aback. He said, "Well, what else can I do?" Well, that's how he was. And does that make him special? Only in the sense that he, out of all these stupid people, was able to be what he should be. We all can be that. There's no difference between Jesus Christ and you. We have to realize that the essence of religion and the immortality those great masters have talked about in every religion is something you can experience right now. And the more you have it now, the more you'll always have it. Otherwise, you can come for billions of years, always seeking that pot at the end of the rainbow. And every rainbow you finally trace to its lair, you might say, you find a bit of mud, that's all. No dream of life is going to give you what you want, but you can give you what you want. If you realize that you are a child of God, if you realize that you're an emanation from Him, and that you have no reality except He. Well, in the beginning, the ego starts thinking, oh, well, but I should do it, I can do it, I'm important. It's difficult for the ego, very difficult, to say you're doing everything. But it's so liberating. The more you do it, the more you feel, well, yes, of course. This is what it's all about. When you don't feel you've done it. My music, I just never think of it as mine. I'm happy that it was done. I happen to be the channel through which it came. But it's not my music. It's music. Whatever you do in life, don't think you are doing it. As soon as the ego gets into it, you get trapped in shrinking consciousness, contractive consciousness. And whenever you can forget yourself, give yourself this example. You're watching a sunrise or a sunset, and you're absolutely taken with its beauty. But somebody else sitting next to you is an artist. Oh, I think I could do better than that. He's analyzing, he's getting himself involved. He can't lose himself in that experience, as long as he has that consciousness. But how much more wonderful it is when you can see beauty, hear beauty, see wonderful people, and accept them as what they were. One time Mozart was attending a concert, and this was a younger composer, had to be pretty young because he died young. But another composer came and whispered in his ear, I wouldn't have resolved that chord that way. Mozart said, neither would I, but that's because neither of us could have come up with such a happy solution. Here he was talking about a junior composer when he was the greatest of his time. But he had that openness that could enable him to enjoy without getting the ego involved. This is the secret of immortality. When you can have that, your body can fall apart. It doesn't matter. I remember a Swami I met in India. His name was Narayan Swami. And he was an old man, and he died not long afterwards. And he was in the hospital, and he had considerable power as a young boy of 12 years old. Thank you. As a boy of 12 years old, he used to go swimming in tanks, as they call them in India, where there were crocodiles, and nobody else dared. He said, don't worry, I will throw a stick, and wherever the stick lands, don't swim beyond that point, but up to that point, you're safe. And he had the power to make that true. It was, you'd call it a miracle, but it was to him simply a fact. And the crocodiles were friendly to him because he had no animosity toward them. Well, anyway, this man was lying in a coma on his hospital bed when the doctors, nurses, nobody could get a response from him. He was clinically in a coma and almost dead. But if a disciple or a devotee came to him and said, how are you? He would say, Bhatacha, I'm very well. They don't lose consciousness. And he could respond to the voice of devotion. Age, youth, it's a revolving door. Doesn't mean anything. You see these little babies, they look so cute, but they're old souls coming back to do their thing, whatever it may be, good, bad, indifferent. We're a mixture. But we can get off this treadmill if we can realize that what we're looking for is ours always. We are immortal. Let's claim that immortality in God. Thank you all.